So what is the ethereal plane? Why is it different from the astral plane? Why is it so much more important to define what the ethereal plane is than the astral plane? Why is 5th edition kind of avoiding talking about the ethereal plane so much? Well, there's a few reasons, and we're going to get into them. The ethereal plane came before everything else. It started off as a space that fits everything else into. So it's, if you think of what's outside of the multiverse, the ethereal plane is. That's all it is. It's basically just big empty space. Now, it's got interesting properties because it's connected to the primal elemental planes. So wafting through the ethereal everywhere is this mist, this gentle sort of misty stuff. And it's often people think of the astral plane as being more colourful than the ethereal plane. That's not true. The astral plane and the ethereal plane look quite similar to each other in many ways. So floating around, because there's no gravity in the ethereal plane, its gravity is wherever you decide it is. It's like you are now Neo, you've stepped through into the Matrix, or you're standing in reality and you can see the Matrix around you. This is the Border Ethereal Plane. So if you log out of the material plane and go deep into the Matrix, like you're plugging into the cell phone and you zip away and you're in somewhere else, that's like the Deep Ethereal Plane. But the Border Ethereal Plane is where the two are merged and mixed, and you're coexisting in the same two places at once. From the perspective of the people in the material plane, they can't see you because you're just not there. You're out of phase with reality. But those that can see into the invisible or the ethereal, some creatures, such as Kotoa, for instance, can see 30 feet into the ethereal plane just naturally because they're crazy little fish people. You're there and you're not there at the same time, so things can't really affect you very well, and you basically just move through matter and stuff like it's composed of bits of code. The protomatter around you, this mist, is in fact elemental energy. It's protomatter. It's proto-quintessence. It can solidify by itself, but of course with the infinite stretch of space and time that is the ethereal plane, this became a 100% certainty that this would happen all the time, all over the place. And so what happened was that it formed the foundation of the prime material plane. So there's actually nothing in charge of the creation of the multiverse per se, although there are individual gods wandering around and very, very powerful primordials who will make you severely question this. Lovecraftian horrors and stuff, that's why they generally look like huge big masses of stuff. They're not really adapted to environments that we would be adapted to. So when they formed, there was no such thing as forests or oceans that had life in them and things like that. They were just literally the first forms of life, and with no restrictions or no instruction book as to what they should do or what they were or what this was all around them. A great number of those things no longer exist, or they became frozen out of reality as reality became more complicated around them. The Drayden are a perfect example of these primordial beings. Anyway, demiplanes naturally form in the ethereal plane by themselves. They also form by artificial means from wizards and things like that, casting spells and creating demiplanes. Whenever they create a demiplane, whenever an extra dimensional space is created, it's created within the ethereal plane. This also creates many loopholes in that you can create a demiplane which then pops into the ethereal plane, and then you can move into that demiplane and then from there into the ethereal plane relatively easily. Leomund's tiny chest, or as they call it in Zakara, the tiny chest spell, is very similar. Is one very common way of doing this. A wizard can literally cast that spell, hop into the chest, he's now in the ethereal plane, and he can just transfer from there into the ethereal plane.
I should mention that the 5th edition version of Leomund's tiny chest or secret chest specifically states that non-living material can go into the chest and be transported into the ethereal plane. Personally, I think that's petty. And like, why are you trying to wreck the fun of that spell? It wasn't like a dodge or anything using that spell to get into the ethereal plane. It was quite clever thinking on players' part to use it that way. So I kind of question the designers' options there and why they chose to go with one that's less fun. I don't know. Anyway, so I've made some notes. If you go to D&D Beyond and look down in the comment section, you'll see my note on that and what I think about their attitude. Personally, I just say, get on top of the chest and ride it into the ethereal plane. There's nothing in the rules as written that says you can't do that. Anyway, onwards. A spellcaster can also use other things like Oil of Etherealness. She could cast the 7th level spell Etherealness and exist for 8 hours in an ethereal state and move around in the ethereal realm as if they were a native to it. However, there are a lot of fundamental differences to movement and eating and breathing and drinking and doing all the normal sort of stuff that you would do, that existing in the ethereal plane is kind of an acquired art. And the natives that live there are very, very good at that art. So one thing that you can do in the ethereal plane is get anywhere. So it's much better as a means of travel than the astral plane. The astral plane can only connect to the prime material plane. Any existing place in the prime material plane can be connected via the astral. Essentially, living things that think and feel must be within that plane of existence for it to have a connection to the astral plane, for the most part. That's not a hard rule, but it's kind of like an assumption, because the astral plane is made out of thought. Where there's no thought, there can't be an astral plane. The ethereal plane doesn't need living things. The ethereal plane connects with everywhere. So the border ethereal plane connects with all the different layers of the abyss and all the layers of the 9 hells and things. Whereas if you're traveling from the astral sea, you could only get to the first layer of the 9 hells. You couldn't get to the 8th layer of hell from the astral sea. You could do it from the border ethereal plane. The border ethereal, therefore, can have a lot of dangers involved. Not only that, but there are demiplanes and things that exist, and planes of existence that exist without a border ethereal zone. So you can actually find yourself transported directly into that plane of existence without passing go, without collecting $200. You don't get the chance to hang out in the border ethereal plane and check it out to make sure it's safe. You're just suddenly there, which can be extremely dangerous. Now, I do have some notes here to keep me on track. So the ethereal existed before the astral, before there were living things, before there were thinking beings. The ethereal plane was there. Nobody created it. It's just like the default state of the multiverse. When you're in the ethereal, it looks like the phlogiston sea. So it's rainbow mists all over the place, big rainbow hues. Now this rainbow color comes from what they call the color curtain. What it's actually called is the realm of dreams. The color curtain is actually the realm of dreams. Now the really confusing thing is that the realm of dreams is also accessible from the astral plane. But that's because it's a mental connection in the astral plane. It makes more sense, really, that you would connect with the realm of dreams in the astral plane, because the astral plane is mental, whereas the ethereal plane is more physical. So in the physical sense, in the ethereal plane, the color curtain of the realm of dreams only exists as it's a two-dimensional space. So it's got no depth to it. It's got height and width, but no depth. Whereas in the astral plane, you can actually go in there. It's a mental realm where depth doesn't apply anyway. So occasionally there will be bulges along the curtain. They're only about 15 feet wide, but they link directly to somebody's dream or something like that. And you can actually go through there and you're subjected to the physics of that dream, which can be very dangerous as well. We're not going to talk about the realm of dreams. I think I've talked about that in another video anyway. So when they get to the color wall, it's toned according to the color of the plane, the border ethereal plane, or the plane which is beyond it. So you see that from the deep ethereal side of things. From the border ethereal, of course, the color wall just looks like a uniform sort of misty rainbow hue thing. You just travel through there and then you're into the deep ethereal plane. The deep ethereal plane is where you find all the demi realms, the demiplanes and things. That's where the protomatter forms into objects and things. Now the really interesting aspect of that is that if you're a spellcaster and you cast an illusion on the ethereal plane, I may be jumping ahead here, but it's so exciting I just have to talk about it. If you're casting an illusion of, say, a duplicate of yourself, now this is a real situation that can occur. I can cite the sources of the pages and things like that. Okay, so let's see. I've got here Bruce R. Cordell's Guide to the Ethereal Plane. This is for AD&D 2nd edition Planescape, one of the better accessories that they came up with for it. And there's this one particular bit on page 34 on the table, Illusion Manifestation, option number 10. So if you want to follow along with me and find this document,
So option number 10 says this. Phantasm can reproduce with real entities, birthing fertile offspring that possess a blend of both parents' characteristics, to which I circled it and put a little arrow going to it with the word "what?" with an exclamation mark on one side and a question mark on the other, because of the possibilities that that presents as a player character. Now, your dad was an illusion of a wizard that he cast on the ethereal plane, because he knows that in the ethereal plane, illusions are self-sustaining. They don't require concentration to keep maintaining themselves, because the ethereal plane wants to manifest things. So it wants the protomatter mist from the elemental planes to become the air that you breathe or the food that you eat, or they want you to think it into existence as some physical thing. It's itching to become a physical thing. When a spellcaster casts an illusion of himself, say, that illusion has the potential, a slight chance, of becoming an actual living being on the ethereal plane. It's composed of protomatter though, and the important thing about protomatter is you can't take it outside of the ethereal plane for very long. It breaks down and falls apart. So let's say this illusion, which has now become a living thing, meets, chats with, has a relationship with, and another adventurer becomes pregnant and travels back to the prime-material universe. They're now pregnant with a child which is part illusion. So you could be half not real as a person in Dungeons and Dragons. The possibilities of this are enormous when you think about the fact that there are so many loose rules for genetics and magical reproduction and things like that in Dungeons and Dragons in the first place, that this just throws it into a whole new left field of weirdness. So you can literally be half of a manifested wall of force. I'm half wall of force, half, I don't know, tabaxi. So, you know, every now and then I turn into a two-dimensional object and just lay flat over a 20-foot area. Who knows? Who knows? I leave it up to you. But as a dungeon master, that provides you with enormous amounts of possibilities for just creating very, very weird stuff. Living spells and things like that is one of the things which I've found quite fascinating, and the fact that they can exist on the ethereal plane. The fact that you can cast spells without concentration also opens up a huge can of worms for the potential for magical combat and situations and traps and stuff like that. Like traps made up of multiple illusions that don't require any sustaining concentration to keep them going. So one wizard can create quite a tableau of proto-real and totally illusionary terrain around you in the ethereal plane. You wouldn't even know until you interact with it. And then it turns out that some of it becomes real. So yeah, that's one of the things. Now, that brings us around to the topic of living beings which are on the ethereal plane. Now, it makes sense that creatures that become magically capable would find the ethereal plane extremely attractive as a place to go and practice your art. You're not really restricted in any way. There are examples of beings from the world of Toril that did that, and that is Deep Ethereal. Deep Ethereal is essentially a civilization of lost wizards who became adapted to living underground, and a part of their number created demiplanes as a science, as a means of escape from persecution from their former slaves that had brought their gods over to the world of Toril, and were now hunting down all the Emascari artificer wizards and wiping them out. The interesting thing about the Emascari is that they were non-religious. They didn't believe that gods really had any right to rule over them than anybody else. They had this because they had a pretty fundamental understanding of the ethereal plane and the fact that the gods were kind of restricted to the astral plane. They were concept entities. They weren't physical entities per se. So they didn't really conform to the same sort of rules, and they realized that you could create the prime material plane and create new worlds and things like that in the ethereal plane without even having to do anything with the astral plane. The astral plane and the realm of dreams could be just that, planes of thought and concept, and that things that came from there didn't really need to exist. It's a long story, but in the end they eventually brought down the Emascari Empire and turned it into a plane of purple dust and memories. That memory exists now in the ethereal plane, and they are not just living in a bolt hole. Like, we've got the physical description, the rumors of in Toril that if you go into the Underdark and the Earthroot Mountains, you will find portals. Well, they've got their own demiplane dimensional civilization, which is existing there in whatever form it's now in, because it's been thousands of years. And the Amaskari now look like stony-skinned, tall, lithe, very magically adept people who have no real interest in going back to the Primaterial Plane and re-exploring and taking over Toril again. They could if they wanted to, but they have no real reason to. And also, if they do travel back to Toril, the act of travelling back to the world of Toril through a portal or otherwise wipes their memory of the Amaskari civilization as it exists today. So they essentially forget how to get back. So this is a great dissuader for their populace. And really, I mean, it's kind of superfluous. If I were the Amaskari, I would have no reason to go back to the Primaterial Plane either. First thing I'd do if I travelled to the ethereal realm and created a demiplane is I would cut off the original drawbridge and way into the demiplane from the plane that I was trying to escape from, so that the only way to get in there is if you had the address, not went and knocked on the front door. The first thing you do is take away the front door and roll up the carpet, bring it inside. Now, the example that I quite often think of when I think of the demiplane of the Deep Amaskari is Doctor Who's TARDIS. Now, for those of you who are Whovians and big fans of Doctor Who, that really is what demiplanes are kind of like and all about in a way. In the demiplane of the TARDIS, essentially the TARDIS is not moving when you think about it. It's the doorway to the TARDIS which is moving through time and space. The TARDIS is just outside of time and space somehow. It exists within its own sort of rules. It's got this core, almost like a wormhole, extended out through space and time, so that if you travel deep into the TARDIS, you end up recurring. It recurs over and over again, the same pattern. So the TARDIS is infinite in size on the inside. It's got huge amounts of rooms and things like that that are all arranged around the original control room. And the original control room has always got a connection to the outside world. So there's many doors into the TARDIS's control room. And then from there, there's these other rooms which attach to it. But if you go downstairs or upstairs, it's almost like you're traveling up or down that wormhole, and you travel to old versions of the TARDIS or newer versions of the TARDIS somehow. Now, if you're a civilization that was built in there, you would have probably some sort of hierarchy as to how close or far away from that front door you are, maybe, just for sheer convenience. But other than that, it would be essentially qualifying and getting skills in order to use the ethereal plane to manifest whatever sort of reality you want, and then you would go off and expand the Amaskari Empire by expanding its demiplanes, its areas of reality into and of itself. Now, that means that there could be fashions of creation. There could be demiplanes which follow a certain trend or a theme. There could be famous ones which branch off into certain areas. There could be operational or bureaucratic demiplanes which deal with all the minor demiplanes of all the students and things like that. And of course, magic use and politics and what these individuals do is entirely their only concern, because nobody has access into this demiplane apart from themselves. That means you could have entire washed out, nightmarish areas of the Deep Amaskari Empire, which are demiplanes where a war once took place, and reality has been so badly disrupted within those places that they are sanctioned, they're sealed off, and the bureaucracy prevents people from going in there. There could also be like nightmare weapons that destroy reality as we know it. Things like time bombs and black hole generators and things like that. Now, I'm going to be going on to individual topics and individual races like the Lamazu and the Shadu and where they exist and what they do and things like that. But it's important to realize that that the Primaterial Plane exists like a canopy, like a self-sustaining spot where mature demiplanes go. And it's arranged in the way that there's a phlogiston gas and that there's these crystal spheres and things, because that's always the way Dungeons & Dragons sort of did it. Like the ethereal plane mimics the material plane in many ways. Like the material plane is a manifestation and a reflection of the ethereal plane. So when you've got these crystal spheres, they are also representative of the demiplanes that you find within the ethereal. So the ethereal's even larger than the phlogiston sea. So more on this as we go, and more sort of podcasty episodes. Sorry for the lack of output lately, but I'm hoping that you like this more sort of conversational thing. And if you've got any questions, just put them in the comment section down below, and I'll answer them in my next podcasty episode as I talk about the cosmology and the planes of existence, and in particular the Deep Ethereal Plane, which we'll be talking more about soon.